This video is about how I start and maintain and expand a sandbox campaign so that it has a good chance of lasting more than 100 sessions and years of gameplay. Despite my best efforts, not every campaign lasts that long, but I have methods to make it more likely. Those methods are managing the phases of a sandbox campaign and the transitions between them, knowing what to spend my time on and prepare and what to not prepare, how to entice players to interact with the non-player characters and factions, how to make the campaign world feel like a living world without creating a massive amount of material that players never engage with. Finally, having a set of tools for improvisation while limiting the need to use them. Let's start by talking about some basic principles. Number one, player agency is the keystone of what makes an open world sandbox function. Players decide what their characters do. I decide what rules, procedures, and dice mechanics to use in the process of determining the outcome of those choices. If there's no rule or an existing rule is inadequate, then I have to make a ruling. That ruling will be based on logic, the spirit of the game, and the input from players to produce a fair result. Number two, I don't know how my campaign will turn out before I run it. I want the campaign to have a certain feel. That can be achieved without plotting or railroading the events of the campaign. A group of imaginative players will make choices that I never anticipated. The rules, the dice, and my rulings when necessary will produce results that will surprise all of us, me included. Number three, this isn't my campaign. This is our campaign. When players suggest something that I haven't already decided exists in the campaign world, I will add it into the sandbox whenever I can. Player contributions add to the richness of the setting. If a player asks me if something exists in the sandbox that I didn't previously write up, then I add that thing into the setting unless I have a reason why it won't work. This only applies to things I haven't designed yet and yet would still fit into the campaign concept. Sometimes players trying to resolve a mystery or work out what an NPC is up to will come up with a theory that's more entertaining than what I designed. I do not change what I've already created to fit that theory. Other game masters disagree with this position. This is my thinking here. Maybe the adventure would be more exciting and have a bigger payoff if the player's theory was right, but I don't know that for sure because we haven't played it out. What I do know is that the player didn't put the clues together to find the correct answer. If the player makes an incorrect guess and I change the answer to fit that guess, then the player has lost their agency, principle number one. As a player, I'd prefer to find out the less exciting truth than have the game master change it to be a more spectacular falsehood. Number four, mistakes will be made. Players will make mistakes. They'll make bad assumptions about what the party can handle in a fight. They'll trust the wrong non-player character. They'll misinterpret a clue and come to a false conclusion. They'll forget that they picked up a potion a few sessions ago that would have been really handy here. Players will make more poor choices that have bad consequences. That's player agency. I will make mistakes. I'll make a bad call. I'm going to miss a detail. I'm going to put something into the campaign that makes no sense. these things happen. When I screw up, I tell the players, I admit it, I fix it as best as I can, and then I move on with the game. Respect player agency. We don't know how this ends until it ends. This is our campaign. We are going to make mistakes. Those are the main principles I use to run a sandbox. My experience is that following these principles means it's more likely to produce a long-running campaign that in the aggregate will be surprising, deeply engaging, and meaningful to the group. There will be some sessions that won't be fun. A player character that's 12th level can still fail a saving throw and be utterly destroyed with all their magic in an instant. The party can fail a mission and experience major setbacks. They could also take down a villain in a single combat round or think of a way to overcome a clever and deadly trap with a simple and elegant solution. There will be failures, there'll be successes, and the failures will make the successes more meaningful. The unexpected outcomes will make me a better dungeon master because I will learn from that situation. Now, I'm going to talk about the phases of the campaign and how I transition between them. In our first session, I describe where the players begin, the situation their characters are in, and provide hooks for the adventures. The players choose a dungeon, they explore it, fight some monsters, find treasure. Any survivors will turn to town, recover, decide to go back to the same dungeon, do some exploration, or visit one of the other dungeons. That's what the first phase of the campaign will generally consist of. I start with 2 or 3 adventure locations at the beginning of the campaign. I may also include 1 or maybe 2 opportunities for adventures involving the non-player characters or factions in the home base. But I never want to have more than 5 choices. 3 is better. Too many choices will cause players to spend a lot of time debating about which one they're going to pick and which adventure to go on. Limiting the choices reduces the probability that I'll have players spending a whole session debating what they're going to do. And it makes the campaign a lot more manageable for me because I only have to manage those 3, 4 adventures. It wouldn't be possible to create 100 sessions worth of adventures before starting the campaign. So I have to add new adventures as we go along. Since I start with 2 or 3 sessions, I have time to add more locations before the players finish exploring the first one. If my campaign is based on exploration of a mega dungeon or a large ruin, I make new levels or create new parts of the ruin. If we're playing a hex crawl, I develop new hexes. One way to make sure I know what to have ready for the next session is to have an agreement with the players. When we finish gaming for the day, they will tell me where they're going next and what they intend to do. And then they do that. Ideally, I will have given them plenty of hooks and clues for the adventures I've already created, and they'll pick one of those. To prepare for the next session, I update my notes on anything that changed the last session, review the notes for where they're going to, continue to work on the next adventure location I'm going to add when they finish playing through the first one. Sometimes I have to create a whole new adventure between sessions. But if I've dropped enough hooks with some juicy bait on them, players will typically go for what I've already made. Even though the adventures I make are a little more than an outline and some notes, they will require effort and time. To reduce the time and effort involved, I use any resource I can grab, blank dungeon maps, free adventures from online sources, random generators, and sometimes published adventures that I buy. As long as the resource fits my campaign concept, I'll use it to create a new adventure or to pick one. As each location is explored, I deliver hooks for the new one. I make sure there are at least 3 easily findable clues or hooks that lead to each new adventure. For low-level characters, the chance to find more treasure and magic is usually enough bait. By the time we're about 10 to 12 sessions in, the players will have solved a few small problems that the locals are experiencing by killing some monsters or taking out some bandits. And the players will have interacted several times with some minor non-player characters like innkeepers and merchants. Those non-player characters will gossip with other non-player characters about that group of heavily armed lunatics who go into scary places to fight monsters and spend money around town like rock stars. That party's reputation will get around town. I use that reputation to decide how the minor non-player characters in town act toward the player characters. If the party is heroic and spends their money freely, most non-player characters will be friendly. If they're troublemakers, the non-player characters will be less friendly and hostile. This is an important practice for the reality or the verisimilitude of the campaign world and to reinforce the idea that player choices have consequences. The reputation of the party and the relationships they have with minor non-player characters are a tool for creating hooks and even entire adventures later in the campaign. There's not really a clear, definite dividing line between the first part of the campaign and the second part of the campaign. There's a sort of gradual transition between them, and you almost don't even know that you've gotten to that second phase until you're there. A big piece of that transition are the major non-player characters and factions of the campaign. I use them to set up that transition. I've linked the goals, resources, activities of those factions and NPCs into the adventure locations, random encounters, and the home base. I place clues and hints about how NPCs and factions are involved in those places. I make the clues easy to find, but not something obviously leading directly to a particular NPC or faction. It will be something minor, something out of place, something odd, like why are these orcs in here with this wizard? Doesn't make any sense. As these little clues add up, players will get curious about what's going on and who is involved. I want to slowly build the picture over weeks and months. I'm not going to give them the smoking gun in one session. The party may not start investigating yet, but they'll speculate about what's going on and they'll share their theories with each other during play. If you're communicating with some sort of group chat between sessions, the players may chat and talk on there as well. I pay attention to those conversations. Paying attention to out-of-character conversations between players is really useful figuring out what they find most engaging. If a player is speculating about something, then that means they're curious about it, they're interested in it, and they're likely to chase it. Remember, I don't change what exists or what the non-player characters are doing because I've heard an idea from a player that's better than the one I had. If I've set it down, this is what's happening, then that's what's happening. I'm just listening to the players to find out what they're interested in. So then I have time to prepare new adventure locations linked to those things that they have expressed this curiosity about. The major factions and non-player characters have an impact on the sandbox. Taxes go up because the king is raising money to build a new keep. Certain items become impossible to get because monsters or bandits are attacking merchants. As part of my prep between sessions, I think about what the major NPCs are doing to achieve their goals and the progress that they've already accomplished. I write that down in my notes in my events calendar. If those activities cause a problem for the locals or alter some aspect of the setting, I'll tell players what they notice or the rumors they hear back at the end. Friendly non-player characters might tell players about those problems and ask them to do something. If players take an interest, then I develop those events, factions, and NPCs more. If not, then I don't. Players will grow more and more curious as we progress along, and they'll start poking and prodding where the clues lead them. And that brings us into the next phase of the campaign, which is when the characters start seeking to acquire more potent magic and abilities so they can take on bigger challenge and get bigger treasure. In the first 20 or so sessions of the campaign, players are exploring dungeons, ruins, meeting minor NPCs, learning what the place is like, picking up clues about the conflicts between major factions and NPCs. When we get into the second phase, the characters are at least 3rd level, but probably not more than 5th. By that time, players will know who their characters are and what they hope for them to become at higher levels. If it isn't clear to me what the players' goals for their characters are, I can just ask. If the group has only been taking on jobs brought to them by a quest giver, I will encourage them to be more active in seeking opportunities for fortune and glory. Active players make it a lot easier on me by asking about where they can find specific things they want their characters to have, like new spells or magic items. Those questions are player-created objectives, and what I rely on most in maintaining and extending the life of a sandbox campaign. This is another way that players contribute and collaborate with me in creating our campaign. If a player asks me about legends and rumors of powerful wizards or magic swords, then I can use that as something to create a new adventure or a new thing that exists in the campaign world. Every adventure has primary objectives, and those are typically set by the game master or an adventure designer. The experience point and leveling rules of old school D&D assumes the primary objectives of most dungeons is outwitting monsters and finding treasure. Some adventures will also have objectives like rescuing someone important, solving a mystery, or recovering an object for a quest giver. Players can create their own objectives for adventures that will be tied to growing their characters' powers and abilities, like learning Fireball or finding a magic sword. Some players will have long-term goals, like usurping the king or building a wizard tower. I include those objectives when I add new adventure locations to the sandbox. The other major piece of any adventure are the obstacles that prevent the player characters from achieving their objectives. If the players are giving me an objective, then all I have to do is create the obstacles, more or less. I add adventure locations that contain what the players want or get them one step closer to what they want, and then I create the obstacles that stand in their way, drop hooks so players know that what they are chasing is in the new adventure location. If the players know a location is likely to have something they want, the more likely it is they'll want to go there. If what they're looking for is a powerful artifact or the means to defeat a major non-player character or monster, then I can build a large dungeon or multiple adventure locations requiring many sessions to finally achieve that objective. This might be a sequence of linear adventure modules, which is something I tend to avoid, but it will be something the players will choose. It is possible that the players will change their mind and decide to do something else some point in that sequence. But if the reward is appealing enough and they put it out there that this is what they wanted to do, they usually won't change their minds. If their objective doesn't have something to do with a major non-player character or faction, I'll make an effort to connect those player-driven adventures to the NPCs and factions, though they may not be completely hip deep in them. When players start asking where they can get something, I'll look for a way to use an NPC as a hook to create a complication. I look at the list of goals, obstacles, and resources for each faction or NPC that I created a long time ago. If a faction has something or knows something the players need to achieve their goals, I will create encounters or social engagements where the NPC offers the player characters what they want, in exchange, of course, for doing a task or acquiring something the non-player character wants. If my players don't want to create their own goals and they're content to explore dungeons and wilderness areas, I can still use those NPCs and factions to create hooks and adventures for those locations. Powerful NPCs might hire adventurers to do something their minions are unable or unwilling to do for them. Since these factions and NPCs are in conflict with other factions and NPCs, any problems the players solve for one faction will cause a problem for a different faction. The party will start developing enemies and allies as a result. When players do something a faction doesn't like, the non-player characters will do something about it. They may give the party a warning not to mess around, or they may send out goons to try to beat the characters up. They may ambush the party while they're on their way to another adventure site. The NPCs might not attack the party directly. They might do something that will cause a nuisance or a problem for the players, like discouraging merchants from doing business with the party. These actions will annoy and irritate the players. And there's nothing I love more when a player says something like, "I hate that guy. We should kill him." Annoyed players will usually be incited to violence against an NPC, but not always. The party might decide to make a deal, not get any others into each other's business. Boring. I also have had parties play pranks on NPCs or hire arsons to burn down their buildings or businesses. Whatever the players choose to do, I decide how the NPCs respond to that based on their current goals, activities, and resources. Before moving on, let me address one of the most common questions I get about how I run a sandbox campaign. And that is, do I create a huge amount of material so that no matter where players go, I will always be prepared? And the answer is no. I pay attention to what the players want, as I've described earlier in the video. I present very tasty bait for the adventures I create, which is something that they've told me they're looking for. By paying attention to the players' out-of-character conversations and the conflicts they get involved in, I know what the players find interesting because they're acting, they're going towards something. They may not tell me what they want, but their actions tell me everything I need to know, or will often tell me everything I need to know. So I spend most, if not all, of my prep time developing the details to whatever that is, because that's what they're most likely to engage with in the future. That doesn't mean I won't have to improvise, but I will have to do less of it. Being good at improvising adventures takes practice. It would be weird if you got it right the first time. Remember, the fourth principle of running a sandbox: mistakes will happen. Here are a few techniques that I use to make it more likely that my improv will succeed. I have used random generation tables for adventures and locations. They can work, but I find they slow the game way down because I have to stop, roll dice, figure out what's going on, and then tell the players. I will improvise encounters with NPCs or monsters and then give them a hook that leads back to something I prepared. So I only have to do one encounter, maybe two, and then, oh look, there's a dungeon that I've got notes for. I will look at my brainstorming lists of non-player characters and monsters. I'll look at my write-ups for factions and major powers in the area and look over the resources, goals, all that stuff. And sometimes I can just pick something off of those lists real quick that will make sense to the location. Hey, there's some minions out here burying a body. I wonder what that's about. And then the players can get involved in that or not. And that's a big piece of this that's really important, is these things need to be avoidable for the player characters to maintain player agency, just like any other encounter or adventure. Another easy improvised encounter that works really well if you're relatively close to the home base area or close to some other sort of civilization is a nameless NPC in distress, or a nameless NPC who's camping out or digging for gold by a creek, or something like that, where it's not necessarily a combat encounter. It's just an encounter where player characters maybe get a piece of information or lore about the setting. Even though I'm probably not going to use a random table or generation table to generate a whole adventure or a whole encounter, random generators or often what I use is just create lists of general purpose non-player characters with a few basic things like name and a description and a quirk. If I need to improvise an NPC or something, I can just pull one right off of there or roll one up real quick. Those sorts of generators are things that you can find all over the place online. Sometimes there's books of them. They're particularly useful, and I recommend keeping some of them around for just this sort of situation. If I do have to improvise, I take a lot of notes of what's happened in that session. And then I'm going to create any new material that situation sort of implies for the sandbox. Sometimes, for some weird reason, these improvised things will become some important part of the campaign. Now we're going to start thinking about the move into the third phase of the campaign. By this time, the players will have explored most, if not all, of the starting area and the expansions that I've created for it over a period of dozens of adventure sessions. And I'll have to start coming up with adventures in other parts of the campaign world if I haven't had to do that already. The characters will be close to 9th level or maybe past that by now. We'll have to have a conversation about whether or not we want to do domain play or just totally focus on having epic adventures as high-level characters. Just having a conversation about that out of character at the game table is really maybe the best way to do that, because high-level campaigns can feel like almost a whole different game in ways. The players might decide, yeah, I'm not really into that, and retire their characters, and we can start playing in a different part of the campaign world or whatever suits us. If you've never run a high-level game, I recommend it. It's a very rewarding experience, but it is also a challenge. The scope and scale of these adventures and the things that characters at this level can get into is way different. Instead of a 12th level wizard or a chaos cult causing a problem for a baron, it's like a barbarian warlord with an army of tens of thousands conquering the continent. A demon prince seeking to find a lost artifact hidden somewhere in the city. Your characters will have ridiculous high-level spells. Over a period of dozens or maybe 100 adventures, they will collect a lot of magic items. At least one per every 2 levels. So if you're talking about a 12th level character, they'll have 6, maybe 8 magic items. They'll be able to teleport or fly over long distance. They'll be able to slaughter dozens of low-level monsters in a single round. And they'll be able to fight monsters that would wipe a party of 7th level characters without breaking a sweat. In my last video about outlining the world outside of the starting area, I talked about the most powerful NPCs, factions, and monsters in the setting. During the first 2 phases of the campaign, I'm kind of thinking about what those beings are doing, even though that's way down on my priority list. As the campaign gets closer to high-level play, then they become a bigger priority. And I treat them just kind of like what I do in the middle phase. I decide what the major powers want, why they can't have it, what are they doing about that, what resources they have at their disposal. I figure out how their actions affect the campaign world generally, and the area where the PCs are currently adventuring specifically. Just like the transition between the first and second phase, except with bigger, powerful creatures. The minions of those entities will be the main way that I introduce these creatures into the campaign. They'll start showing up and causing problems. I'll also drop rumors and information from travelers and refugees coming from the region where any problems are happening and are caused by those entities. As the players become more powerful and their actions have an effect on the larger campaign world, they'll develop a reputation just like they did in town with innkeepers and that sort of thing. They're just having bigger reputation now that they're bigger characters in the world. A high-level wizard might hear about the party and hire them to steal something from a rival. A secret society may send an emissary to recruit the party for their cause. If my players decide they want to run a domain game, I'll start looking for ways to make that difficult. I'll create obstacles by deciding how the high-level NPCs or monsters or factions don't like what the party is up to. An ancient dragon will not like a group of powerful adventurers building a fortress near its lair and start eating the workers or their livestock. Large stretches of time can pass in a campaign world in this phase. They may spend months working on magical research, overseeing the construction of a castle, or training an army. It is not unusual for me to give a quick overview at the beginning of a session of what's happened in the last 6 months. We'll resolve any activities they've been working on and say, nothing much has happened except for this big problem that just came up. Keeping track of the passage of time on my events calendar is crucial in this phase. Most campaigns will start to fizzle at high levels. Some players don't get too excited about playing fantasy superheroes, and others aren't particularly interested in the social aspects, complexity, and sometimes bookkeeping of domain games. If the players are into doing epic high-level adventures, then it can go on for quite a while longer, because those adventures tend to involve travel into the outer planes or over huge distances across the campaign world. The D series and Queen of the Demon Web Pits adventures for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons are a good example of that. Well, that's how I run a sandbox campaign and keep it going as long as I can.